Hello everybody, welcome back again to the Reggae Appreciation Society. It goes without saying that Black Uhuru is among the greatest reggae acts of all time. After Bob Marley and the Wailers, it's probably the most popular and most commercially successful reggae group we've ever seen, and one that made history when it won the first Reggae Grammy in 1985. Since its formation in the Waterhouse district of Kingston in 1972, it unleashed wave after wave of sublime, groundbreaking music that redefined the reggae landscape and blessed our eardrums with some of the most beautiful reggae tracks ever recorded. At the dawn of the 1980s, the group became flag bearers for the genre, energizing the reggae scene and lifting the mood of a country and globe that was still reeling and mourning the death of Bob Marley. But for all the group's stunning success and legendary achievements, vicious disputes over the ownership of the group and its name have made headlines in recent years almost as much as its music. Since the group's formation more than 5 decades ago, there have been 5 different incarnations of Black Uhuru, with several parties contending for a stake and rights to the name of the legendary group. It's a fight that's been waged from the media down to the courtrooms in the United States and Jamaica, with Ducky Simpson as the central figure in an almost 3 decades feud with Michael Rose, Don Carlos, Garth Dennis, Junior Reid, and even Sly Dunbar and Robbie Shakespeare. Let's take a look at the war for the soul of Black Uhuru and ask the question, who really owns the group? To get to grips with the true answers, we need to take a deep dive into its history and lineup over the past half-century. The story begins in Kingston's Waterhouse district in 1972 with 2 friends, Rudolph Garth Dennis and Derek Ducky Simpson. Ducky was an aspiring young singer who was living with his friend Garth, who had a day job as a customs broker but came from a musical family, as his sister Beverly Kelso had been among the early members of the Wailers, and he was also the brother-in-law of popular Jamaican singer Joe Higgs. Garth Dennis had grown up in Trenchtown before moving to Waterhouse and had been childhood friends with Bunny Wailer, Bob Marley, and Junior Braithwaite, and he had even been among the many youth that Joe Higgs had mentored in music. Ducky and Garth decided to form a musical group. They chose to make it a trio, based on the Joe Higgs power trio formula, and recruited an aspiring singer, a lanky youth from the Waterhouse area called Eugene Spencer, aka Don Carlos. As the story goes, the 3 guys were rehearsing in the streets one day when a passerby asked if their group had a name. When they said no, he suggested the name Uhuru, a Swahili word for freedom, and the trio embraced it. They went to record their first single, titled Folk Song, at the Dynamic Sound Studios. The song was written by Garth Dennis, who also sang on lead vocals. But when it was time to record, Ducky's vocals didn't make the cut for the harmony, so the producer, Carl Peterson, had to enlist the help of Boris Gardner, who happened to be in the studio that day, and eventually Boris Gardner replaced Ducky on the song. They had the same difficulties even on their second single. The group began to drift apart and eventually came to an end. Garth Dennis joined the Wailing Souls, while Ducky Simpson formed a new Black Uhuru and Don Carlos went solo. The reason for the trio's breakup has 3 different versions depending on who you ask. According to Ducky, Garth Dennis left the project to join the Wailing Souls and Don Carlos went solo. While according to Garth Dennis, Ducky stopped showing up for rehearsals as well as recordings and largely kept to himself after his difficulties with his vocals in the studio, while Don Carlos faded away and got a job as a postman while nursing a solo career. And Don Carlos's own account that after the difficulties in their first recording session, Ducky stopped showing up for Black Uhuru projects, and along with Garth Dennis, they started hanging out more in Trenchtown with a group that eventually became the Wailing Souls. And when the Wailing Souls invited only Garth Dennis to join, Ducky went back and formed a new Black Uhuru with Michael Rose and Errol Nelson in 1976. This new Black Uhuru released their first album in 1977 titled Love Crisis for Prince Jammy's record label. With the departure of Errol Nelson not long after, they added American singer Puma Jones in 1978. This third lineup entered into a collaboration with Sly Dunbar and Robbie Shakespeare, who produced a slew of incredible songs that would become reggae anthems. These tracks included Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Shine Eye Girl, and Plastic Smile. Michael Rose's magnificent singing style, masterfully complemented by Ducky and Puma's brilliant harmonies and backed by Sly and Robbie's flawless instrumentals and production, became an unbeatable group that took Jamaica and indeed the world by storm and saw them win their first Reggae Grammy with their 5th album, Anthem, in 1985. But around that same time, Michael Rose left the band following a series of disputes with Ducky Simpson and was replaced with Junior Reid, another fantastic Waterhouse singer with a similar singing style to Michael Rose. Not long after, Pumo Jones was diagnosed with cancer and was forced to leave the band, and eventually passed away in 1990. Junior Reid also fell out with Ducky Simpson and left the group. So in 1989, Ducky made the decision to reassemble the original Black Uhuru lineup, and the trio of Garth Dennis, Don Carlos, and Ducky Simpson were together again and enjoyed an amazing 5-year run with 4 albums which were all nominated for Grammy Awards. But by 1994, the reunion had come to an end and marked the start of more than 2 decades of bickering and controversy. It all kicked off when Ducky went on a tour of Europe with dub poet Yassis Afari, and in his absence, Garth Dennis and Don Carlos were booked for a tour of the US under the name Black Uhuru. This turned out to be a hugely successful outing that led to more gigs, including a performance at the 1996 Olympic Games in Atlanta and the Reggae Festival in Colorado. It's still not clear why the reunion fizzled out, but Ducky got furious at Don Carlos and Garth Dennis for using the name Black Uhuru. The pair were scheduled to perform at a huge concert in 1997 that was called the Air Jamaica America Jazz and Blues Festival when Ducky moved against them. He secured a court order that barred them from performing under the name Black Uhuru, though the court later lifted the order and allowed the show to go on. Ducky proceeded to file a case at a California court. He sued the pair and claimed ownership of the Black Uhuru name in 1998. The court eventually awarded judgment in Ducky's favor, but it wasn't the end of the matter, as Garth Dennis and Don Carlos continued to perform under the Black Uhuru name, much to Ducky's annoyance. To make matters worse for him, Junior Reid also reportedly played a couple of concerts as Black Uhuru. Sly and Robbie also got in on the act, using the name without Ducky's approval or knowledge. Ducky would make his feelings known in several statements in the media and didn't hold back his feelings, referring to his former bandmates as nothing more than crooks and frauds. Over the years, the back and forth continued and got to a head in 2018 when Michael Rose challenged Ducky's ownership of the Black Uhuru trademark. Michael Rose's claim would fail, leaving Ducky as undisputed owner of the Black Uhuru franchise. The rationale and motivation behind the contention for the name by the former members are really complicated, but are in strange ways a bit understandable when you dive into each party's point of view. At the very beginning, Garth Dennis and Ducky Simpson came up with the idea for the group as friends and formed it with Don Carlos. So it's not unusual for Don Carlos and Garth Dennis to think of themselves as co-owners. Michael Rose in recent times hasn't held back on taking credit for Black Uhuru's emergence as a world-beating outfit thanks to his scorching lead vocals and songwriting ability. And when you examine the fact that he also wrote some of their most iconic songs like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, you sort of see the reason behind his angle. He was also the one who introduced Ducky to Sly and Robbie, whose instrumentals and production wizardry powered the group to prominence. To all intents and purposes, Sly and Robbie were considered part of the early Black Uhuru lineup, and they helped to power the group to success. Not to mention that Black Uhuru's early material were all released on Sly and Robbie's Taxi record label. So depending on the nature of the agreement that they had in both days, they might have felt that they had some rights to Black Uhuru's intellectual property like most record labels do. But whatever the case, it's been a very messy state of affairs and a dark patch on one of reggae's greatest ever groups. The contention seems to have died down, but it still remains a cautionary tale on how success, personal squabbles, ambition, and a lack of clarity at the beginning of partnerships can lead to ridiculous drawn-out feuds for ownership like the more than 2-decade fight for the soul of Black Uhuru. So there you have it. Thank you for watching the video today. Please leave a like, subscribe, and until next time, Jah bless.